Hello and welcome to the Ideas Factory as we bring another episode of the Ideas Factory to you. What does it really mean for India, especially in situations like Operation Sindoor, which we say is ongoing?
We build our capacities, and as we look at Pakistan through the lens of the new normal that we created post Pahalgam with Op Sindoor.
Looking at one of the troublesome neighbors that Pakistan is, looking at the other side and looking at Nepal, what happened there?
Nepal, I think, is somewhere in between. Unlike Bangladesh, where given our relationship with the Sheikh Hasina government, this was not about the ruling government.
How does this really entangle the Middle East conflict?
What happened post-Israeli attack on Qatar? Nothing really. I mean, what happened? Even the Arab states, I mean, they have been quite silent.
It's only Trump who can solve this problem of Gaza conflict and the genocide.
Western Europe has taken by breaking away from Washington on this question of the recognition of Palestine.
Trump can only hope for a Nobel Peace Prize if he solves this. What will be Mr. Trump's next move? Hello and welcome to the Ideas Factory as we bring another episode of the Ideas Factory to you. The world has seen many big developments, and we will try to analyze its impact on India and the world, and also kind of try to understand what it meant. For example, there was the SCO summit, which took place under the shadows of Trump's tariff war, which he has waged on almost every economy that matters. But the SCO summit was also very high on optics, with India, China and Russia presenting a united front. Prime Minister Modi being in China, what did it mean really for the India-China relationship? We'll try and look at that. Of course, the US-India relationship that has been visibly threatened by the highest ever tariff as a punitive measure, along with the new H-1B visa diktat. The UNGA session where the Gaza conflict has echoed, and as the world looks up to Trump for its solution, Trump definitely announces that it should end immediately, but there are no visible efforts that have been taken. In fact, he has rejected the Western allies' steps to recognize Palestine. Other than that, a very important development in terms of Saudi Arabia and Pakistan defense pact. And then the neighborhood. Nepal has seen a lot of violence, but it has also seen a revolution which was led by the Generation Z. What does it really mean for India? It saw a big change in Nepal. So we will try to look at all of that. And joining me to analyze all of this is Harsh Pant. Harsh, if we start with the UNGA, Macron also mentioned that it's only Trump who can solve this problem of Gaza conflict and the genocide. A lot of Western nations have recognized Palestine. Trump has rejected it, and he says that this is validating the Hamas. But at the same time, we've also seen Israel attacking the Hamas delegation in Qatar, and Qatar calling Israel a rogue nation. How is it playing out in the Middle East? And is America really serious about ending this conflict? That's the question. Trump announces that it should end immediately, but what are the measures? What have we seen?
I think, Nagma, when Mr. Trump came to office, he came to office with this big idea that he will be ending the two big wars that were raging then, and that continue to rage even 7 years down his tenure. And I don't think there is any cohesive plan that seems to be in Washington's purview at this point. And I don't think what Trump has done has in any way helped the process. What it seems to have generated, on the other hand, is a sense of frustration, particularly amongst the American allies, as they look at the carte blanche that seems to have been given to Netanyahu and Israel when it comes to the question of how should this be played out on the battlefield. And I think the lack of a political direction to the violence that is being perpetrated is something that is increasingly concerning to a large part of the world, and that pressure we are seeing now being built on in the West, and therefore Western countries are coming out with their own trying to impose their own solutions. Whether or not they are solutions, it remains to be seen.
And some of the countries they haven't done, like Italy, and we've seen protests in Italy
there,
asking
yes. I think the
for
West
recognition
is,
of the
West
Palestinian
is really
state.
at this point, particularly Western Europe, is going through a phase where there is a lot of disenchantment brewing about the trajectory of the policies of their policies towards the region, and that is reflected in this quite dramatic shift that the West has taken, that Western Europe has taken, by breaking away from Washington on this question of the recognition of Palestine. So I do think that this marks an inflection point insofar as West's approach is concerned. But as you pointed out, Macron is also being realistic when he says that ultimately it will be the Washington's heft that will lead us to some sort of a final outcome. Without Washington's
he's also
being
said
at
that
the
because
table.
Washington is the only country. I mean, Americans are the ones who are supplying the weapons. It's not anybody else who's supplying the weapon for this. And he's also mentioned that Trump can only hope for a Nobel Peace Prize if he solves this.
Yes. I think, as you would have noticed, Mr. Trump himself has mentioned almost 7 to 8 conflicts that he has ended, asking for a Nobel to be given to him. But I think the larger point here is often leaders overestimate their ability to shape both the battlefields as well as the political landscape. And I think in this particular case, Mr. Trump certainly seems to have had a belief that he would come and somehow these two major conflicts would be resolved. And we know that neither Russia-Ukraine conflict nor the conflict in the Middle East are going in the direction. In one case, certainly in the case of Russia, he's insisting that it ends and Russians and the Ukrainians are fighting it out. Whereas in the other case, he's not insisting that it ends and therefore it continues. So I think it's also a dichotomy that way, that both these conflicts continue to have their own trajectories, irrespective of what Mr. Trump is wishing happen on the battlefield.
Absolutely. Another point I wanted to, your opinion on that. When Israel launched an attack on the Hamas delegation in Qatar, and Qatar has been a state that has been involved in mediation, and Qatar has very clearly called out Israel and said it's a rogue nation, and also questioned the basic principles of the UN Charter. How does this really entangle the Middle East conflict now with Qatar's involvement there and Israel now also attacking a Hamas delegation on the Qatari soil?
I think that was quite an extraordinary development, and even by Middle Eastern standards, to take the battle to Qatar, and to sort of announce to the world in full public view that Israel can take certain actions which may be deemed problematic, highly problematic by some of Israel's closest allies, was an act of in some ways of a magnitude that we have not seen. Israel had been doing a lot of things, but to cross that red line certainly has and is likely to have a major impact. But I would also say that what has also been interesting is, this is, when you sit here and when you think about it, it's a huge red line to cross. But the response, I would say, has not been as significant or as loud as you would have expected. And I think in some ways, first, of course, with what is happening, what happened to Ukraine, and now what has been happening in the Middle East, I think the world is normalizing the use of violence to attain political ends in ways that we had not seen, at least since the end of the Cold War.
But Israel is leading the way.
With the end of, I would say, since the end of the Second World War. We are moving in a direction where, if you say that, look, sovereignty is just something that we read in our books. It does not actually apply on the ground, and countries can go around and challenge sovereignty in ways that Israelis are doing, or even Russians are doing. This is a big shift in the way we look at how world order is evolving and should evolve.
It's a big question on the world order and a big question on the United Nations
Absolutely.
itself.
And see, I think Mr. Trump's speech, in some ways, is also a vindication of the ideas that he had propounded in his first term when he had gone to the UN, and he was mocked at that point in time. People, sniggered when he said something. Today, it is par for the course. It is matter of fact. That this, that what he says is so normal given what has happened in the last 8 years. That we are clearly at a new normal where certain norms, certain values, certain institutions, certain principles don't really matter. And nation states are now being led by this very, very militarized version of their national interests, and they're pursuing them in ways that are quite extraordinary. And going back to this question of, why, what happened post Israeli attack on Qatar, nothing really. I mean, what happened? Even the Arab states, they have been quite silent. Not the kind of reaction you would see, in terms of...
There was no outrage.
Absolutely not. And I think in some ways there is an acceptance of this fact that these things are perhaps going to happen more and more. And therefore, a point that you started off with, this Saudi-Pakistan compact, defense compact. This is a Saudi-Pakistan relationship, a defense relationship coming out in the open, is a reaction or is a very primal reaction to a normative challenge that the world is facing. I think somewhere down the line, Saudis have internalized this. Or many countries in the Middle East are internalizing this, or most countries in the world are internalizing this, that we have no one but ourselves to depend on. Now, this used to be the very basic fact of international relations, IR 101. But I think we tended to believe over a period of time that we are moving towards a more progressive phase where certain principles, norms, institutions would matter. I think we are now reaching a stage where everyone is for themselves.
All the principles.
We have to have defense pacts. And with countries like Pakistan, who have a pact with the Western countries, with America.
Yeah.
So it's a circuitous arrangements that countries are going to rely on increasingly to save themselves.
Yes. So basically what you said, all the norms, all the principles themselves are, there's a big question mark there, that does it really matter? When you talk about the Saudi Arabia and the Pakistan defense partnership, now, a lot of people, and of course we know that it's a fact, that it is a formalization of a long-standing arrangement. There's nothing really new. But the very problematic thing is the statement that an attack on one will be considered as the attack on the other. Now, what does it really mean for India? Should India... of course, India should not overreact is one version of this. But what does it really mean for India, especially in situations like Operation Sindoor, which we say is ongoing, and, the kind of terrorism that is propagated from the Pakistani soil, if there is any retaliation, then what does this defense pact mean? We also know that our relationship with the Gulf states and Saudi Arabia has been only strengthened in the last decade. And diplomacy would be working in talking to Saudi Arabia too. But the timing of this pact, the formalization, how do we look at this?
I think that there are two aspects. One is, of course, that the Saudi-Pakistan relationship is a long-standing one, historical one, and India has lived through those periods where Saudis openly were supportive of Pakistani irredentist claims on India, and the way Pakistan was handling India was being supported by Saudis implicitly, if not explicitly, and I think it's only in the last decade that we have seen Saudis breaking away from Pakistan in some ways and building a more future-oriented relationship with India based on economic strengths of the two economies, going beyond the energy and the energy factor that used to be the dominant one. So I do think that that this what used to be a historical relationship, for various reasons, it has today become important for Saudis in particular to bring it out into the open. And my thinking would be that this is a lot to do with what is happening, as we were discussing, in the Middle East, both in terms of the Iranian dimension, but also in terms of what is the larger breakdown of deterrence in the Middle East, and how do you then prevent and how do you strengthen your deterrent capabilities. One way of doing it is by building this partnership with a nuclear-armed Pakistan, and this is a program, the nuclear program of Pakistan, has a lot of Saudi input in resource ways. I mean, the Saudis have been considered to have funded a large part of this program. So there is, in some ways, a normalization of that relationship that we are witnessing, and they are looking at it from a deterrence perspective. But for India, I think many in India who have only seen the last decade of this relationship would also be wondering if the investments that Saudis are making in India and India is making in Saudi Arabia, how should we evaluate those investments now? Is there a need to reevaluate and revisit that that engagement? I would say that in some ways a lot can happen through diplomacy, and I think we should ask. I hope that we are asking the Saudis to explain parts of this, as you mentioned. What are the red limits? What are the red lines in this engagement? And as we build our capacities, and as we look at Pakistan through the lens of the new normal that we created post Pahalgam with Op Sindoor, what role potentially Saudis will be willing to play? They have, of course, said that, look, this is not aimed at any third country, but it is difficult when you have a line like this, which is basically an alliance, that one for all and all for one, in the sense that if I'm attacked, you will come to my aid, and if you are attacked, I'm going to come to your aid. If that is the arrangement that is inherent in this in the pact, then India certainly will have reasons to worry, and India will certainly also have reasons to ask Saudis as to how far this relationship with Pakistan they would be willing to take, given the context in which India and Pakistan operate, and given how India continues to push back against Pakistani export of terrorism towards India.
This also strengthens Pakistan in a way. I mean, also validates Pakistan. Even though we've seen that all kinds of terrorism are still emanating from the Pakistani soil, looking at one of the troublesome neighbors that Pakistan is, looking at the other side and looking at Nepal, what happened there. India is surrounded by a very troubled neighborhood right now. And when we look at Bangladesh, we look at Nepal, we look at Sri Lanka, of course, Pakistan is there. But what happened in Nepal currently, the instability that we saw there, for Nepal, what does it really mean? Of course, it was something against corruption, and it was led by the Gen Z. But do you see any kind of instability brewing and foreign hands? There are lots of speculations that have been on. So foreign hands being involved there, the instability that we saw in Bangladesh, and what does it really mean for India?
Instability in our neighborhood, of course, is it goes without saying. It's bad. It's serious, and it creates disincentives for India in so many ways. Particularly at a time when India would want to focus on its own internal economic development, building of its domestic capacities. So if you have a periphery that is troubled, if you have a periphery that is not stable, it creates all kinds of challenges. But I would just say that in the neighborhood, you always keep on seeing ups and downs. We have had these conversations about a neighborhood for as long as we have been doing this this discussion. Often things look particularly troublesome. For example, with Maldives, Maldives is relatively stable today. They have India and Maldives have been able to stabilize their relationship. Similarly, in Sri Lanka, when the crisis started, it looked very, very difficult which direction it would go. India has a reasonable relationship now with the government there. So with Bangladesh, it has been very difficult. It had been a difficult transition, and we have still not reached an equilibrium with Bangladesh. Nepal, I think, is somewhere in between, because Nepal's, I think, unlike Bangladesh, where given our relationship with the Sheikh Hasina government, this was not about the ruling government. This was pan-political parties. This was about all political parties, and everyone was targeted. People were fed up with the political establishment, which meant that not only the ruling government but also the opposition was targeted. So I think in that sense, India was less of a factor. In terms of the challenge that the Gen Z posed to the ruling elites. This was more internal. This was more about people getting fed up with the kind of nepotism, with the kind of malgovernance and corruption that they were witnessing. And that resulted, and that manifested itself in brutal ways. I think some of the visuals were heartrending. And
the kind of visuals we saw in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh.
Yes. And I think... but it is also interesting how quickly
it resolved, right?
It sort of, people were able to get hold of themselves, that suddenly
unlike
there was,
Bangladesh, which went on for a long time.
For a long time. So here, I think those who started the movement, they suddenly realized that it has gone beyond what they had, gone beyond their control, and a lot of actors who perhaps should not have entered. The whole burning of the parliament, killing. I think many the way politicians were treated. I think there were one of them also died. I think the realization that things have gone out of hand, and I think the role that perhaps the military played, which was stern, and at the same time keeping themselves behind, not projecting themselves as the only institution that can govern, which tends to happen very often, and therefore the quick transition to a civilian government, caretaker government, has been done in a manner that perhaps bodes well for Nepal. We will see. We will wait and watch and see how this unfolds. But I don't think there is any great internal turmoil that we are witnessing at the moment. I think that initial turmoil, that initial burst, has been taken care of, and one hopes that as these negotiations and as the political, as Nepal takes its steps towards a different political direction, they would be able to both create political institutions and work through the existing political institutions to create a better political architecture for themselves. Because ultimately, it's a question of governance. It's a question of better governance. It's a question of aspirations of the ordinary Nepalese. And I think that is something that whoever is governing Nepal should take into consideration. And presumably they were not, and that's why the revolt and that's why the Gen Z expressed their anger.
Of course. And India is, of course, very patiently watching and is willing to talk to whoever is in power. Now, looking at another relationship which has been worrying Indians more than anything else is the India-America relationship. And very quickly in the end, your comments on the India-US ties as well as the SEO summit, because they're both linked, the way tariff war has been waged by Trump. Now, the India-US relationship is, if I may say, very troubled and at an all-time low, and also very publicly. There are, on both sides, people are talking about it. So where do you see the India-US relationship going, really, with the tariff war, the new H-1B visa diktat, the Prime Minister pitching for the Swadeshi and all of that? And what we saw at the SCO was the India-US-Russia partnership. And also the talks about India and China coming together in a strong way. Of course, it's China, so we have to be careful. But the visuals, the optics were very powerful. And it was taking place in a time when the tariff war was, all out.
It's very difficult to talk of India-US relationship and predict where it might end up because of how Mr. Trump has managed it so far. He, of course, has taken steps which have not gone down very well in India, to put it mildly. And he continues to do, the megaphone diplomacy, which is public diplomacy, diplomacy through social media, which is largely counterproductive. It works sometimes. For example, when he wished Prime Minister on his birthday, and when he says Modi, my friend, etc., there is a sense, that he's able to convey to a wider audience that, look, I'm not against India. But I think his steps, the policies that he's putting in place, certainly seem for many in India as if India is being singled out, and that is not a situation that India-US relationship should have been in today, given how much investment, diplomatic and otherwise, has gone into building this relationship over the last 3-4 decades. I think so long as we do not conclude the trade deal, we will continue to be in this turbulent phase. But also, our expectations from the US should be more balanced, because the nativist instinct in the US that is now emerging, this is not simply Mr. Trump. Trump has exacerbated the problem, but he's also appealing to a sense within America that there needs to be greater balance from their perspective. So when it comes to H-1B visas, that is what he's appealing to. That's a sense, the MAGA sense of why we are not getting jobs and why Indians and outsiders are getting jobs. So I think that equilibrium America and that attempt at re-equilibrium that America is going through domestically will have consequences for America on the global stage. And unfortunately, all the advantages that we had in the relationship will also seem like disadvantage today, because that is where the equilibrium will be reset domestically, and therefore the impact on a country like India will continue to happen. And a lot of this we'll have to bear and move on, because this is an internal debate within the US, and Trump could have handled it better, but I don't think he's the president that we should rely on to handle things diplomatically. So I think broadly what you are looking at is a serious phase of turbulence, although fundamentals still remain where they are.
But his megaphone diplomacy, as you termed it, has worsened it.
Absolutely.
Whatever
it has exacerbated the problem. And you see, if he's appealing to his domestic base, then of course India is also a democracy. Indian politicians also have to respond to the domestic sensibilities.
Sure.
So to expect them to respond and not to respond to that is also foolhardy on his part if he's thinking like that. That I can say what I want. Although Indians have been very measured in their responses, Indian government has not said any word here, there, and elsewhere, which is out of place. But I think the fact that people are annoyed and angry at Mr. Trump, a lot of Indians, and that it has revived this debate on this old question: can America be trusted? That debate has many who would say that, look, we need a strong India-US relationship. Today have to take a step back and say, well, under the present circumstances, this is really a challenge. And so you have revived the Cold Warriors. You have revived all those who always said that, look, America can't be trusted. And now they are saying, well, we told you so. So there is that momentum that we are losing in the relationship.
Of course. So can America be trusted is a big question. And that brings me to the next part of the question. Does it bring India-China closer, or does it bring India, China, Russia closer, or you see the group like an SCO becoming stronger?
I think the optics at the SCO summit, where Mr. Modi, Mr. Xi Jinping, and Mr. Putin are together. That was a powerful visual. And if you could correlate, you saw some immediate response from Mr. Trump and in the US, that are we losing India? Have we lost India to the other side, if you will? But I think see, our relations with Russia remain where they are. I mean, they're strong, they are time tested, and they will continue. And India will continue to invest. With China, it's a different matter. With China, the trust factor has to be built, and India and China seem to be trying. I mean, there is an attempt to rebuild the relationship from the post-Galwan mess, and there is an attempt to build economic and people-to-people engagement. How far it will yield dividends, if history is any guide, we should not be very hopeful, because we have tried this in the past and it has not really worked. But certainly, India will continue to try. China also has an incentive in building its relations with India at this point. But whether this incentive structure lasts is now contingent on how Mr. Trump behaves and how he responds to what is happening with the India relationship. Does he care about India?
Of course.
Again, one final point about the ambassador that designate that he has appointed. I mean, Mr. Gore he's very close to Mr. Trump. He may not know India very much, but I think the question that many Indians will be debating is having someone very close to Mr. Trump, is that a good thing, or the fact that he has been given a broader designation as well as the envoy to Central and South Asia, does that mean that India is being looked at through a different lens? What does that mean? Does that portend well for India-US relationship? I think that's the debate that India will continue to have. Much will depend on how he performs once he's here in Delhi.
Of course. And the big question, like you said, is also about what will be Mr. Trump's next move? And that's as unpredictable as it can get. And that's where a lot of things are actually depending on that. So thank you so much, Harsh, for this analysis and putting this in perspective for us. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.